On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we preview KU's football game in Provo against the 6th-ranked BYU Cougars.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Derek Johnson, you can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio, though that's moving over to Blue Sky, new terms and services stuff there. So you can find me, Derek Johnson, on Blue Sky as well. And thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every show. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and find us on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. We're going to be breaking down Kansas BYU, preview of the game. We get to the top headlines. We get to the BYU scouting report, matchups of the game, players to watch, all that and more on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, where you can place some money on what's going to happen in the game. New customers can bet just $5. You get started with $150 in bonus bets. If you win your first $5 bet, visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So Kansas takes on BYU. This is a late one, so get your naps in if you need them on Saturday morning, because Kansas is going to be playing at 9:15 local time in Provo. Now, I guess I don't know if they're on Mountain Time or if they're on Pacific Time. I guess I figured they've been on Mountain Time, so that'd be 8:15 local there, which still seems like a late time to kick off a football game. But KU is looking to be the spoiler in this game, and I think just in general, they're looking to be Big 12 spoiler. They were already the spoiler against Iowa State, because now Iowa State's in a position where they need help and they need to win out, and the only way they're going to make the college football playoff is if they win the Big 12. You know, they can't make it as an at-large really anymore. Kansas has an opportunity to play spoiler on BYU. They got Colorado next week. They can be the ultimate spoiler for the Big 12 and in the college football playoff. And Brett Yormark is probably very much not a Kansas fan right now, because he probably wants his teams to go far and, make as much money as possible and stuff. But, from the Kansas point of view, we don't care about that. Just win the dang game, right? Find a way to do that and make that your thing. But Kansas is hitting their stride at this point in time. It's unfortunate that the record, that the hole that they got in to where they are, because it does feel like they're playing their best ball at this point of the season. And for BYU, they've been playing their best ball all season long. They're looking to stay unbeaten coming into this one. I mean, ranked 6th in the country right now. They'd be the 3 seed if the college football playoff started today. They've had a phenomenal season. Can they keep it going at home against KU? The BYU scouting report, they come in at 9-0 on the season. They have some really impressive wins in that 9-0. You could argue they should be ranked higher. I always argue that, the college football playoff committee should be ranking based on what is deserved, I guess, because it's easy for us to predict, I think this team would beat that team. I think this team's better than that team. Humans, we are just bad at predicting things in general. It should be based on what you have earned. And if you view it off that, BYU is undefeated. They have a really good win at SMU. They have a 29-point win against Kansas State. They've been on the road for the last couple of weeks and got a couple of wins. You could make the argument they should be ranked even higher than number 6. And they've been kind of the opposite of KU. Like, there's a bizarro world where KU is having the season that BYU is having. The reason why: Kansas is 0-5 in one-score games this season. BYU is 5-0 in one-score games, including winning their last 3 games all by one score. But skinning through. They've kind of been like the Chiefs to this point in time. Now, offensively, BYU is 2nd in the Big 12 at 33.7 points per game. But we've talked about this before. You look at that and you go, oh man, they have the second best offense. That's killer. The difference between really everyone right now in scoring in the Big 12 is so condensed together. So Kansas is 7th in the Big 12. That sounds like a big jump between 7th to 2nd in terms of points per game in the league. It's only a 2-point difference. So it's really not that big of a margin between these two offenses. The Cougars are also 8th in the league in yards per play. So in yards per play, they're a little further down than the points per game. They're only 8th in yards per rush. They're 6th in yards per pass and 7th in passer efficiency. The reason they've been putting up so many points, despite the fact that they're more middle of the pack in the Big 12 in some of those offensive numbers. The defense has done a phenomenal job in forcing turnovers. The special teams has set them up for some scoring, but still they've been a solid offense to carry it as well. Quarterback Jake Retzlaff, he is a solid dual threat. He's kind of a gritty, just winning quarterback. They rotate a couple solid running backs. They've got 2 stud receivers in Chase Roberts and Darius Lassiter. They have a combined over 1,100 receiving yards. And then on the defensive end, that's the unit that I view, even though they are second in points per game, I view the defense as the biggest strength of this BYU team. They're third in points allowed per game in the Big 12, just 19.8 points allowed per game. That's almost a touchdown better than what Kansas is doing. And BYU is second in the league in yards allowed per play. So I just think they are elite on this end of the field. The one thing that makes this interesting, there are a lot of similarities. I don't know about like playing style in terms of the scheme, but in terms of the I guess the stats or how they get it done between BYU and Iowa State last week. So if you remember last week, Iowa State came in as they were coming into the game. They were top 2 in the Big 12 in points allowed per game, yards allowed per game, yards allowed per play, all those different numbers. But the one thing that Iowa State had not done well, they came in as a bad rushing defense. Well, that's the same with BYU. They rank near the top in all these points allowed per game, yards allowed per play, but they're just 12th in yards allowed per rush at 4.5 yards allowed per rush. But they are first in yards allowed per pass. They were second last week. Iowa State was first, but Kansas raised Iowa State's number so much that BYU jumped them. Also, BYU, if we remember last week when we did our preview, we said Iowa State was first in the Big 12 in passer efficiency defense. Now that's BYU because Iowa State slid past them after Kansas threw it all over them. And with BYU, they're also not a great pass rushing team. I do think they're a little bit better than Iowa State, though. But just like Iowa State, mentioned last week, Iowa State was leading the Big 12 with 14 interceptions that they were tied with BYU. Well, BYU got 2 last week. Iowa State got none. So now BYU is first in the Big 12 with 16 interceptions. They have 4 different players who have at least 2 interceptions. So they've gotten it from a lot of different ways. In a lot of ways, this is going to be a very similar offensive game plan for KU, but again, different schemes. So maybe the types of plays, the types of route concepts are different in what works against the BYU defense than what works against the Iowa State defense, but the results statistically have been similar, which maybe makes you feel a little bit better. Also sounds like the weather could be like 30 degrees, could be snow. That would lean toward being more of a running football game. They're 12th in yards allowed per rush defensively. I think that would be a good thing for KU. Now, I should also mention special teams, where BYU is the only team in the Big 12 with a kickoff and punt return touchdown so far this season. They have 3 total between kick and punt return. They were in this top half in yards per punt and net yards per kickoff attempt. The kicker has been awesome, 17 of 20 on field goals, including hitting 7 from 40 yards or longer and a long of 54 yards. So just overall very good special teams unit. And if it comes down to that, that would be an advantage for BYU. As far as the importance of this game, I mean, for BYU, it's trying to stay undefeated. It's, you don't know how a loss affects you in this new age Big 12. I'd still imagine the winner of the Big 12 is going to make the playoff. Like, there's an outside chance where like Army goes undefeated and beats Notre Dame and Boise wins out, and then you wouldn't get the Big 12 winner auto-bidded in there. But if they were still top 12 team, they could still make it. I don't think all of those things are going to happen. But yeah, for BYU, trying to stay undefeated and try to lock up that bye in the college football playoff and all those things. And for KU, the importance of this one is looking to string together momentum. You're coming off that win over Iowa State. If you can get back-to-back wins for the first time all season, and not just back-to-back wins for the first time all season, back-to-back top 25 wins with one of them coming on the road to a top 10 opponent, it would keep you alive for bowl eligibility. And I mean, the perception boost that they would get for, beating a top 10 team on the road and having a second straight top 25 win. I mean, perception a lot of times is reality, and like the recruiting game of things, it would be so pivotal for KU. And also as you try to get your 4th win of the season, we kind of talked about this when they won their 3rd game. During the post Mark Mangino days until Lance Leipold, your high water mark was 3. This has been a down year so far for KU. It wasn't supposed to be with the amount of seniors they brought back. It obviously wasn't supposed to be. But if your low water mark theoretically in a down year can still be higher than the high water mark was in the previous decade, that would be important to show of where the program is, that even when it's not your best day, you still have a better punch than you had before. So let's get into the matchups of the game, players to watch. That next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. First, this episode of the show is brought to you by Omaha Steaks. Ooh, delicious. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. This year, skip the holiday hustle and bustle and save 50% off gourmet gifts site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, get a $30 reward card when you shop early and score an extra $30 off with promo code college. Sounds like you can buy a gift for somebody and then have a little gift for yourself. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience, and the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages starting at $89.99. From legendary steaks to mouth-watering desserts and more, save 50%. That's 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code college and a $30 reward card when you shop early. That's 50% off at Omaha Steaks, OMAHA steaks.com, and an extra $30 off with promo code college. Minimum purchase may apply. Enjoy your steaks. Continuing on with this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, our matchups of the game for Kansas and BYU. Again, 9:15 late on your Saturday, so get your caffeine up. Of course, if you're a college student at KU, you're just like, oh, this is awesome. I'm going to go out to a bar, maybe watch the games. I have a good sort of time. I, as a young parent who is constantly waking up at 5 or 6 in the morning, I'm like, oh no, how am I going to do this? Anyway, matchups of the game, first down, limiting explosive plays from BYU. So BYU has been awesome at getting big plays. They rank 11th nationally in echo rate. We've gone over this stat before if you're an everyday or you've heard me talk about this, but if you're new to the show or if you forgot, let me go over it right now. So echo rate is basically a ratio that devolves how often you get like a big play. And it's basically just a metric to view explosive plays. And so if you're really good at getting echoes, you're really good at getting those explosive plays. And that's something that KU has been really good at in the past, and they've done really well these past couple of weeks, I would say. But it's basically a measure that measures the percentages of possessions that get a big play touchdown or a big play first down inside the opponent's 40-yard line. So, you don't have to be an explosive offense to be the best offense out there, but it certainly helps because it can be harder to sustain drives. So they're 11th in the country in echo rate. Kansas defense ranks 111th nationally in stopping in echo rate. So basically, Kansas defense gives up a ton of big plays. BYU offense gets a ton of big plays. That can be scary, especially if this is going to be a game where it is going to be closer like it's expected to be. I mean, the point spread right now is only 2.5. So if you figure it's a close game, right, one big play could be the difference. This was also written to show you the importance of explosive plays. Seth Emerson in The Athletic wrote this back in September. So I don't know what the updated numbers are, but this is just like one excerpt example. So in SEC play, conference or non-conference, the team that won explosive play margin to that point in time in like late September had a 32-2 record. And between 2019 to 2023, so that would be 5 years of data, SEC teams that had more explosive plays than their opponents had an overall record of 397 and 72. And the higher that margin in the game, the more likely they were to win. So according to True Media, for that 5 season span, 2019 to 2023, when the explosive play rate was plus 10 or better for one team, they went 52-2. When it was between plus 5 to plus 9, they had a 944 winning percentage. The first one was 963. When it was even between the two teams, basically ended up being 42 to 38 in terms of that. When one team was minus 10, they only went 2-16. So the explosive play rate so important. You have to be within them in this game. Second down, getting pressure on Jake Retzlaff. BYU's line has been solid this year. They rank in the upper half nationally in both run and pass block grades on Pro Football Focus, but they're not top 30 in either one. So they haven't been, elite. They've just been solid at both. And Retzlaff has been a good player for BYU at quarterback this year. I mean, we had our crossover episode with Jake Hatch, who does fantastic work for the BYU side of things, Locked On. Check that out. And thank you to the Everydayers if you already did. And he kind of talked about that last year. Retzlaff had some struggles with turnovers, that he was 1-to-1-to-1. Passing touchdown per interception per fumble. So he had some turnover issues, but this year he has kind of moved past that a little bit, but there's been way more production in the other stuff. But that one bugaboo has been, if you can get him under pressure, he's going to give you some chances to have some of those turnovers, especially if there is going to be snow, cold weather game. You get pressure on the quarterback. I don't know. I'm just going to make this stat up. I feel like it's double the chance that like a quarterback fumbles the ball when it's cold weather. Completely made that stat up, but like I feel like it's more likely. And so far this season, BYU quarterbacks have a 114 passer rating when kept clean, according to Pro Football Focus. When under pressure, it's all the way down to 34. That is a gigantic, stark difference between the two of those. So if you can pressure, you can get that Mello Dotson, Kobe Bryant game-changing pick six. You can maybe get that strip sack. And specifically, where can KU get pressure? Well, for one, I like when KU blitzes more just in general. I hope they do that in this game. But second would be up the middle. So maybe that's a blitz up the middle. Maybe that's KU defensive tackles, which I think is a good thing because I think KU's defensive tackles have been pretty good this year. BYU's offensive tackles rate in the high 60s on PFF, and the left tackle is a 72 pass block grade. So they've been solid at the tackle spot. But the center for BYU has a sub 60 overall grade on Pro Football Focus, and the left guard's pass block grade is a 59. So maybe you can exploit them a little bit up the middle. Maybe it's Blake Harold or DJ Withers or Tommy Dunn, somebody like that can come up with a big sack. Third down, Jalon Daniels on key third downs. This is always made tougher on the road, but if you can consistently convert third downs on the road, you can quiet the crowd, let alone a crowd like this late at night. BYU is one of the best home field environments in the Big 12 when you combine the atmosphere, when you combine the crowd, when you combine the fact that it's just different in how they go about it. They do a phenomenal job. And so far this season, Kansas ranks first in the Big 12 at 51% on third down conversions. BYU's defense is allowing opponents to convert 41% of the time, which actually ranks in the bottom half. So if you're Kansas, you're trying to pull a road upset, you've got to hit some of these key plays, stay on the field, have long sustained drives, score against an elite passing defense that has only given up 200 yards passing to two quarterbacks. You have to be able to get those third downs. Fourth down here, we're also going to stick with it. Fourth down conversions for KU. This is a stat that scares me. BYU is 16 of 20 on fourth downs this season. That is an 80% conversion rate. If they go for a fourth down, can KU get off the field? Because KU hasn't been particularly good defensively on fourth downs, but also BYU has been elite at it. Meanwhile, from the KU perspective, Kansas is last in the Big 12 in fourth down attempts right now. Despite the fact that they're 3-6, they're last in the Big 12 in fourth down attempts. I am begging the coaching staff to be more aggressive in a game like this on the road, especially knowing that Kansas is sixth in the country in success rate on third plus fourth down, while the BYU defense is only 74th in that stat. So point being, Kansas has been really good on money plays. BYU's defense hasn't been great at it. Be more aggressive. You're playing the number 6 team on the road. Please go for a couple fourth downs if you need them in this game. I guess ideally you're not even having to make a decision on fourth down, but you had a chance to go for a fourth down against K-State. You didn't do it. You punted deep. You had a chance to do it in the early going against Iowa State. You didn't do it. And in one of those cases, you won the game. One of them you lost. But, if it's going to be a close game, you got to find a way to win on the margins. Our player matchup here, I thought about making this the Kansas corners against the BYU receivers because they have 2 stud receivers. You have 2 stud corners. I also thought about making this the KU receivers versus the BYU corners because they have 2 stud corners against what's really turned to be 2 stud, productive receivers for KU with Grimm and Skinner. We haven't seen Arnold as much the past couple of weeks, but I'm going to go with Calvin Clements against the BYU defensive ends. One of the big storylines we didn't go over because I was saving it for right now sounds like Bryce Cabeldue might be out. Sounds like he's doubtful. I guess it's possible he plays, but Bryce Cabeldue's had a really unheralded season. He's been really good for Kansas so far this season. That is a big loss to not have him, especially in a game like this. You look at the BYU defensive ends, Tyler Beatty, he has been really productive for years now, and he's a solid vet. I think he has an NFL future. He has 21 pressures to lead the way for them this year. Isaiah Bogna, he has 14. At times you might face a blitzing linebacker. Jack Kelly, he has 20. And so if Cabeldue is out, like I kind of expect, especially with how solid he's been, BYU is going to know that. Like, they're going to attack the new guy. Like, they're going to come at him at least early to see what he's got. And that means maybe some tight end help early, maybe some running back help early to try to help Clements get into a groove. But if you're Calvin Clements, this is your chance as a young player on the road to step up in a tough environment. I mean, that's going to make it tougher. You're a young player on the road. And if you can have a big, there's a real chance because Cabeldue is going to be gone at the end of this year. I mean, Calvin Clements might be the starting offensive tackle next season, regardless of what happens, right? But if you perform well in this situation as well, it's going to feel like pretty darn obvious that you're going to be the starter next year. And that would be quite a big moment for a young player. All right, let's get to our Hawks to soar and pick a prop next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Episode today is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. We're going to get to our pick a prop, which is with FanDuel. Kansas right now getting 2.5 points on the road against BYU. FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment worth. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, finishing things up, thank you for tuning into the show. You can check out Locked On College Football, Locked On College Basketball for your second listen. Of course, we're going to have a bonus Friday episode with our KU Oakland preview, so be on the lookout for that as well. All right, Kansas getting 2.5 points. Let's get to our pick a prop here in a second, and some of those, we might go over some players who are our Hawks to soar. These are players we think can have good games. Let's start with the offensive side of the ball. We're going to go with Devin Neal and Daniel Hishaw. Here's what some of the more productive lead running backs in the Big 12 have done against BYU. Because, again, they're 12th in the conference in rushing yards allowed per play, like yards per carry allowed. DJ Giddens, good running back for K-State, 19 carries, 93 yards. Ollie Gordon for Oklahoma State, 16 carries, 107 yards, and 2 touchdowns. RJ Harvey for UCF, 16 carries, 127 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then last week with Micah Bernard, who's been good for Utah, 17 carries for 78 yards. So none of those are like jump off the page, like 200 yards or anything like that. But those are all very solid numbers for some good running backs there. The other thing that, again, in our crossover episode that we kind of uncovered, Jake Hatch kind of talked about an inability to stop scrambling quarterbacks for BYU. And obviously KU struggled with that themselves. So that would be something where you look at both those guys as possible numbers to go over, which we'll get to again in a second here. As far as the defense side of the ball for Hawks and soar for KU, I'm going with Blake Harold. He had over 40 snaps last week, which was his new career high. He had a big game for KU. He was really good for the Jayhawks. And I mentioned earlier in one of the matchups, interior pressure being a key. I think Blake Harold's playing his best ball. He's really progressed in his redshirt freshman season, enough so that I'm almost going to be penciling him in next year to be like, well, I guess, I don't know, maybe that'll be tough because I think Withers and Dunn and Taylor could all be back next year as seniors as well. So maybe that impacts playing time. But like, it would not shock me, I guess, point being, if Blake Harold in 2025 is an all Big 12 defensive tackle. That's how good he has been and how much he has progressed so quickly in his time at KU. So can he have a big game here in this one on the road? All right, pick a prop over at FanDuel. So mentioned again, 2.5. The over-under is 56.5. Passing yard numbers for Retzlaff, 234.5. Don't really want to touch that. Jalon Daniels, 194.5. Don't really want to touch that either because of the fact that there could be snow. BYU has the top pass defense in the Big 12. So avoiding that and going to avoid some of the receiver props in that same ilk, although maybe Quentin Skinner at 39.5 yards because he could get that on one play with a big play necessarily. The ones that I'm looking at, though, are in the rushing props. Jalon Daniels is 31.5. Mentioned BYU sometimes can struggle with that. With the weather the way it is and with what we've seen the past couple of weeks with Jalon running the ball well anyway, I think it makes a lot of sense for Jalon to go over on the rushing yards there. Devin Neal, 81.5. Also like the over in that situation. And then Jake Retzlaff at 24.5 for BYU. I like the over on that one. You can even get fancy with this and go to alt rushing yards, and you could do Jalon Daniels alt 25 plus rushing yards, Devin Neal, let's say 60 plus rushing yards. And that parlay is plus 125. If you want to add Jake Retzlaff to get 25 plus rushing yards in there, it goes to plus 328. So we like that one. And obviously, if you're looking for a touchdown bet, I kind of like Daniel Hishaw. Could be a, cold weather game, and maybe he's kind of pounding the rock physically, and you can get plus odds on Daniel Hishaw, because Devin Neal's at minus 200. Like that could be a good one where you throw that in as a parlay, right? We could add that to the three you mentioned. It goes up to plus 444. But you can also just get Hishaw plus 160 to score a touchdown. You can get him at plus 1,000 to score the first touchdown, or you can get him to score 2 or more touchdowns at plus 900. So some interesting ones that you might be able to sprinkle there for your pick a prop over at FanDuel. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. Again, check out our KU Oakland basketball preview as well. We'll have post-game recaps for both of those games over the weekend as well. Check out our recruiting episodes. KU football got a big-time receiver commit this week who's also going to play basketball. Samis Calderon, a 4-star recruit for basketball, also joined. We had episodes with that. So check those out if you haven't already, and see you next time with Locked On Jayhawks.